Great, welcome everybody. Today we're going to be doing the Revit site tool. First I'm just going to go into this presentation. Okay, happy Friday. Welcome to another session. Today we're going to talk about site tools, good, bad, and the ugly. So I guess when you first started using Revit, this is the tools that you're gonna get. So today I'm just gonna basically going over like how to create topo surface, site component, parking component. It's kind of like, okay, you place an object and how do you host it on site, building pads, split face, merge face, sub region, property line, grading region, etc. I'll probably focusing mostly topo surface. There's a couple things I want to explain is that I would never use split face and merge face. Never use that. The reason why I said don't use it is because chances are user will screw it up. Okay, when you break up any topographics, it's very difficult to merge it back in because the position sometimes could be off by like millimeters. Very, very small, minute, and I never seems to find it to kind of work. I always tell people, use subregion, do not use this too, okay? Property line now. One of the interesting part about Revit when it comes to property line is that it always draw it in two-dimensional, so you can only see it on plan, but when you start doing like section, like 3D and stuff like that, they don't show property line. So how do you create that? Okay, that's one thing I'm going to show. Grading region, I don't use too much of that stuff, but I'll show it if I have to. But I would say that grading region, sometimes it's useful, sometimes it's not useful. So I'm not gonna show something that is not really useful to everybody. Geez, what is happening? Okay, next. Okay, other topic. So I'm just gonna show you guys how to create topographics using CAD linking. So let's assume that you link in CAD. How do you get the informations? And I'll also demonstrate, railing. You can use railing for your site. I'm also going to show you guys how to modify existing planting. Let's assume that you have a plant. You want to have different types. How do you create that? Because sometimes what happens is that when you receive existing file, sometimes people purge all their planting, and how do you create that? I'm just gonna make sure everything is good. Okay, connections, problem. And what not to do with the site. All right, next. Come on. Yeah, I don't know what's going on. My connection has been established. Oh, go away. Okay, final bonus. If I have time at the end, we're just going to look at Site Designer plugins. I was playing around with it. It's very clunky, I would say. But you can build roads, you can build soft terrain. But one thing I have to warn you is that it's not very friendly. Okay, so I'll just demonstrate you how to build a simple road. The only issue I have is that once you build it, you cannot readjust it. So it's a very clunky. I wish Autodesk would fix it, but unfortunately they're not going to do anything. But I'm just going to show you how it's done. All right. All right. Let's see. Audio hardware. Sure, use the hardware. Okay. When you first started Revit, let's assume that I'm just going to close out of this. Let's see. Close out of this. I'm just going to start a new template, so that's much easier for everybody to kind of learn the process. So when you start a new project, let's assume that you're going to use architecture. Okay, the process of creating site is pretty straightforward. So all you have to do is that you go to site, go to topo surface. Okay, first thing it's going to tell you it's not going to work because you're in the wrong level 1. But you can actually turn by default. It's always going to be turned off. So if you go to the bottom part, it's default. It's always going to be off. So what I typically tell people to do is that use site. That was what it was created. Okay, what it does is that it tells you this is the origin point. So what you do here in the topo surface is that you can go in at points. Let's assume that this is going to be my 1 meter interval, and what you can do is that you can just place the point. If you want to do, let's say this is my 2 meter interval, then you can say this is my 2 meter interval, 3 meter. There we go. Okay, it's a pretty straightforward site, very simple. Now, if you want to adjust how the how much contour you're going to show in this particular site, is you go in here, go to this particular little button here. That's always going to be setting. And in here you can say, okay, what's the interval? So let's assume that I'm going to change that to 500 millimeters, or let's say 250 millimeters, right? And in here you see that there is an earth cut material. What this does is that if you pass your 3 meters, the hatch will not show up. Okay, so if you want to go beyond that, right? Sometimes people cut section, it's about like 10 meter deep. If you want to go beyond that, this is where you're going to say, okay, I want this to be 20 meters, for example. So this is where you change the depth. So when you cut a section, it will stop at 20 meters so that you don't get that abrupt end. Because sometimes people ask me, oh, how come my hatch only stops there, but my parking is still like below grade? It's because of this guy right here. Okay, so there is one called like stop and start kind of increment. So you can say, okay, what's my stopping increment? What stop? Like this, what this means is that how high your Revit topography is going to be. So this is kind of like the set limit, and here they do have increments. So I always make this increment and that interval the same. But if you want, you can do 500. Okay, what this does is that if you make it 500, it means that any secondary, it's going to be a lighter kind of a shade. So what I'm going to do is that I'm just going to do 500 increment. Okay, you notice that right now, this, every other topography, it's lighter, which means that this is basically the major one, and then this is the minor. So if you want to go like labels, like contours, all you have to do is just pick one site, pick the other. What it does is that it gives you that topography. So here I'm just going to go into 1 to 500, and there we go. Now, one thing I always hate about this is that they're always, let's see, how do I do unit format? Now, if you want to change this to meters, all you have to do is click on this and set it to meters, rounding to decimal places, and say meters. Okay, what it does is that it allows you to change it. The unfortunate thing is that depending on where you place your contour, the direction it's gonna be fixated, unfortunately. So it's always gonna be top down or sideways. Okay, yeah, I don't like this one. Unfortunately, there is no button to kind of change it or rotate it. You just have to work with whatever they have.
And is that because that's where you started that line? So if you drew the line in the other way, would they be facing the other way?
That's a good question. So if you, let's say, do it the other way, would it help? Let's try the one. Nope. Okay, it doesn't work. I guess what it does is that it goes from the lowest to the highest. If let's assume that I'm going to rotate this topography, let's assume I'm going to rotate this and say 180 degree, then yeah, it does that. So it's always going to go from top to bottom, right? So yeah, so just make sure this is the quirkiness of Revit that you cannot fix. All right, building pad. Now, if you have a building, okay, you can use what's known as the building pad. What it does is that it just creates a hole in the ground. So what I typically like to do is that I have my topography, and then I like to put in pads. So what pad does is that you can make it whatever shapes you want. You can make it circle. I'm just going to draw a circle here. Okay. What this does is that it tells you, okay, this is the hole I'm going to cut into. So what it does is that this is going to be your flat kind of a slab. I would not use this as a slab. Do not use this as slab. So what I typically do with the pad is just that I would create, like, let's say a very thin profile. I would say thin profile. Just give it like, you know, if it's like a sand, just give it like a sand, like gravel or something, so that it represents that, you know, every time when there's a foundation. So here I'm just gonna pick if there's a sand. If not, I'll just create one. Let's make it cherry. For this thickness, it really depends. Like if it's like a compact sand or something, you make it like 4 inches. If you do not want to see it, then I would just say make it 1.5 millimeter or like 1/16 of an inch, right? So make it very, very small, so that, you know, when you cut through a section, let's assume that I want to cut a section through this section box, all you're seeing is just basically a very thin profile. You won't see it. Like in section wise, it looks very, very small. I like to do that. Okay, so here you notice that there sometimes there is a hatch and sometimes there is no hatch. It really depends on this earth. And then if you click on this, right now by default there's no cut pattern. So if let's say you're going to change this to, let's say, earth pattern and hit apply, you notice that right now it starts to see that earth pattern. Now if I change this to, let's say this is 3 meter, let's say 4 meter. Oh, not 4 meter. Yeah, it will not show up in 3D, but it's only going to show up when you go elevations or sections. Okay, but this one I think it just goes infinite, so regardless of what it is, so that's what it shows. Okay, so that's basically the gist of site, right? And then if you want to build a road, let's assume that there is a road, then you use what's known as the subregion. Okay, what it does is that it allows you to basically say, okay, I want a road to here. Let's assume that this is my road. Okay, you can actually go outside. In the past version, it won't let you do it, right? It would just tell you error, can't do it. When you click on that, it basically creates that boundary of it. Now, keep in mind, if you're doing a pad, right, you do not want the pad to go outside a property line. So assume that you want to put this outside. It'll tell you, nope, can't do it. Okay, just to remind you that don't, like, whenever you do a pad, don't put it outside. But when it comes to road, you can do that. Okay, those are basically the two kind of differences. Okay, you can also apply different materials. So let's assume that you are here. You want to give it like a different materials. Let's say I'm going to go to shaded mode. Okay, you can apply this to different materials. So let's assume that this one I want it to be asphalt, for instance. So here I'm just going to go default. I'm just going to go default roof. And then when you hit OK, and that's a different color. Now keep in mind, topography doesn't like surface patterns. What I mean by that is it doesn't like to do this. So if let's assume that here I want to change this surface pattern to, let's say, that one, it will tell you the topo surface do not support surface patterns. So yeah, don't even try. Okay, just something you cannot use surface pattern. However, if you want to show like a different material, let's say you have to use realistic. Okay, so what I mean by realistic is that here, default roof, if I want to change this to, let's say, checkered pattern, right? So let's assume that this one I want to be a stone. Okay, let's assume that this is the stone pattern I want to use for the road. Hit apply. And what happened is that, there you go. That's how you do it, basically, if you want to apply, let's say, a texture material. Then, you know, your surface, you're going to see that. Okay? Any questions so far with this?
So you created a sub-region if you would like to.
Yes, like, yeah, do road, yeah.
Apply to the surface of the topo.
That's correct. Yes. Now, keep in mind, you will run into this problem where you have to create a side road. Let's say, for example, you want to do a road, but the problem is that none of this line will snap, right, unless you do an edge. Okay. So what happened is that when you're doing like topography, you can snap onto the region of the road, right? But you cannot snap onto any of this particular. Let's say you want to do this edge, right? You can only pick end to end, okay? Because sometimes what you have is that you have like a curvature, like let's say a road has a curve. And what happens is that you cannot pick that point, unfortunately. Like here, you see that I cannot pick anything. So what I typically do is that if you run into that problem where you have to pick that surface, what I typically like to do here is that I like to edit this boundary, select the line, copy this, right? Copy that particular line. And what you do here is that you just paste current view. What it does is that it creates a model line, and then you can say convert that into a drafting line. Now what you have is that you have your outline of your road. Okay, so that's how I do quick, like basically copy all the road, like let's say boundary. Now what you can do is that if you want to do like a separate one for a sidewalk, then you can go subregion, go pick, And let's assume that I'm going to offset this by like 1 meter. Right? And then what you do is that you just close it off. So that's how I do it quickly, very, very quick. Let's say, oh yeah, it doesn't like to do that. Make sure it's closed. And there we go. And then here, if you want to make a different material, then you can say, okay, for that one, I want to make it default wall and just make that into a different material. Let's say this one I want it to be concrete. Sure, let's say broom gray. And there we go. So that's how I do it. So if you have a road and you want to do sidewalk, I always just go into the previous one where you edit the boundary of your subregion, copy it, paste it outside, and then you just pick your boundary. It's much easier that way, because I know what I've seen people done is that they use the AutoCAD to trace it first, and then they try to trace the same thing boundary again. The unfortunate thing is that sometimes the survey drawing has overlapping lines. It's very difficult because it picks whatever line. So the much easier way to do it is just pick whatever subregion you have done, copy that and paste it in so you know that that line is correct, and don't use the CAD. All right?
Is there a way with the subregion to like sit it down? So if you were to make it a road, the roads obviously have a sit down.
Yes.
Can you?
No. Yeah, that's the unfortunate thing about Revit is that once you do subregion, you cannot make it sit down, but you kind of have to create something else. I'll probably show that later on, like how to do that. One way I do it is using what's known as railing, right? So you can create a railing profile that is like, you know, a sidewalk width, and all you have to do just make it sit on top of this topo surface, and it will just follow that. Okay, so maybe I should just do that simple demonstration. So let's assume you want to do a sidewalk in this particular one using railing. The first thing you do is you would create a profile, okay, just any profile you want. I usually start with the generic one. And in here, what you typically do is that you go into this family categories, okay, shape, what is it, okay, just not defined is fine. Profile usage. So what I typically like to do is that I would change this to railing. Okay, change that to railing. What I like to do here is I like to do it in the middle, but you can do it to a side depending on which side you want it on. So here I'm just going to say this is 500, 500. Okay, let's assume that's your road. And I like to do one top and one bottom so that you can say depth or height or whatever. So here I'll just go 20, 35 is fine. 35. Now what I like to do with this is just make it equal distance. So this is 500, 500. Make it equal distance. And then next I would just say this is my width. Okay, width. And then next I would do is just go, this is the height and this is the depth. So I'll just say height, HT, and then bottom one is going to be the depth. Okay, and what you're going to do here is that you just basically draw in your profile. So this is my line. Okay, once you're done this way, you can save it and call it like you know, sidewalk profile. But here I'm just going to leave it as it is, and I'm just going to go into the site that I've created. I'm going to use railing. Okay, right now by default it's going to use what's known as pipe. That's fine, just draw it in. So here what I'm going to do is that I'm going to edit type, duplicate, and call this sidewalk. Okay, and in here the only thing I'm going to do is turn everything off. So just set it to none. So let's say you copy in a lot of stuff, you have like a fancy little railing, always set everything to none because you don't care. The other thing you want to do is get rid of all of this, delete it, and here I'm just going to call this sidewalk. And this is where I'm going to say profile, give me family one, which is, you know, sidewalk. Material, again, you can just choose whatever. I'm going to call default wall, and this is where you're going to change your height. I'm just going to go 0. Okay, and it's gonna give you that railing because because of this guy right here, top railing. Just say no. Okay. All right. Let's assume that you want to make a sidewalk out of this. So what I'm gonna do is that I'm just gonna go railing. I just want to make it like that. Sidewalk. Hopefully this works. Okay, pick. Ooh, that doesn't work. Okay, I forgot 2017 doesn't work. But I'll save it to 2018. Okay, let's assume I'm gonna save this. Let's say I'm gonna put it on my desktop to say this is site. Now, this one thing I forgot to mention is that 2017 doesn't have this function, but 2018 you do. Okay, so if you're using one of those version, like the upper version, then you can use that profile as a sidewalk. So that's a new trick, right? So in a 2018, what it's similar to 17. So it's let's use the 2018 instead. Yeah, that's one thing I forgot to mention to people is that this trick will not work in 17. But if you want to make this thing hosted to your topography, you certainly have to use 2018. Now, if you want to do it in 17, what you can do is that you can do this, select this, go to slope, custom, and give it a height. Let's assume that this is going to be 2 meters. Okay, and what it does is that it basically creates the slope. Well, right now with the slope it's a little bit too gentle, so you can say, okay, 3 meters. Let's go from there. Let's see, slope, custom correction, sloped. Yeah, I'll probably need something at the bottom. Let's see if that works. Quick sketching. Yeah, it always does this weird things. Anyways, so that's how you do it, like for sloping kind of a surface. Do I have 2018? Just give me a sec. Okay, good. I'll just close this out. No. Okay, so let's open up the other project that I've created. Site. Yeah, don't you wish Revit could be just different versions? You know, you can downgrade, upgrade, you know. Alright, so once you have this, the next thing you can do, let's assume that there is no slope. Okay, so I'm going to turn that off and turn that off. Okay, let's assume that this is what you have. Now what you can do is that now you can pick it, and that becomes your sidewalk. So it does have thickness as well, so you notice that you can host it on site. So it's pretty good. And if you want, you can also do, let's say if you want to do a fence, for instance, I typically like to do this guy right here. Let's assume that you want to do a fence. You can do like pipe, pick a fence, and then what happened is that you can make it host to this topography. Oops. Make that, pick a host, and what it does is that, it does something weird. Oh, because I forgot. I cut it. So if you go up, there we go. So you can actually build fences with that now. So if you have picket fences and stuff like that, so you don't have to like create a bunch of stuff for differences. This one is certainly you can do that. Okay, any questions so far? Railing is pretty good because I used it to do like curbs and all that stuff. It becomes a very, very useful tool.
I just have a question regarding the building pad.
Sure.
Can you make the pad sloped, or must it
Yep.
be flat?
It can be sloped. So yes, that's a good question. So can the pad be sloped? Yes, you can. Okay, so one thing you kind of have to keep in mind is that here I'll change this to just a rectangle, right? Let's assume that you're doing a parkade, right? So let's assume that this is my parkade, and I would create another one. I'll just copy this, okay? And then next I would just do pad again, do building pads, current view, and I'll just push it down. Now, if you want to make a slope, there's a slope arrow. You can say, okay, for instance, I want to move this up. I typically like to do slope. All right, let's say 18% is fine. Okay. You notice that, it creates that kind of a slope. So what I typically like to do is I'd make a thin profile. Yeah, you will notice that, like, what the heck is going on there. Okay, that's just a glitch. There's nothing much you can do about this kind of a thing. So here what you can do is that for slope, I like to put in percentage, well, not slope degree, but slope. I like to do percent. Okay, so what you can do with percent is that you can just say, okay, for this particular building pads, I could make it, let's say this is 2%. 2%. Yeah, sometimes it does that. So what you have to do is that just modify the pad, edit the boundary, make this thing, and force it to 2%. Sometimes you cannot do it outside of that. That could be a glitch. Right, there we go. So that's how you do it. Like a lot of time what I do with the ramp is that I would do each individual component so that when you cut your topography, it looks like it's a perfect fill kind of area. So this is how I would approach it for the sloping. Yeah, but keep in mind, sometimes you will get like a really thin profile coming out. It's because your line is like off by like millimeters. So you kind of have to make sure. What I typically like to do is that I always like to do alignment, right? Align. Always do alignment tools. So you pick that edge and that edge so that they kind of intersect each other. Okay. Yeah, just a couple of things in mind. Just keep in mind because sometimes you will see like really small edges.
So what is the alignment tool?
Oh, alignment tool. Okay. So what alignment tool does is that you can just go and go AL, right? Or this guy right here. If you not that one. I think it's AL. It's this guy right here. Okay, and then what you do is that you pick that edge, right? Pick that edge and pick the edge of where you're going to draw it, and what it does is that it will close up that gap. Okay.
So does that potentially change like angles to make
It will,
sure
yes.
meet in the middle?
Yes, that's correct. That's correct. So sometimes what happens is that if you have like an angle that's like off a line, it will just match it to that particular location. Okay, so just keep in mind of that stuff. All right, let's put a couple trees. So let's assume that you want to put a trees in there. Let's say I'm going to go into the site. Okay, site components. In here you have oak trees. You have a bunch of trees in there. Okay, so let's say I'm going to put it there. That's what it looks like. But that is what it looks like non-rendered. Now sometimes what happens is that I hate seeing like this. Let's assume that you use a lot of shaded area. I like to make this thing transparent as much as possible. So what I typically like to do is that by default it's not going to do it. So what you have to do is that you have to go in here, apply material. Okay, just give it material. Okay, this is just for like if you're in a shaded view like this. And if you want, you can say, okay, this material I'm gonna give it to, let's say, air, for instance. Okay. Then what you have is that you have this shaded view, and sometimes people add like poche, just make it look like that. Okay, so if you want to change, like, let's assume that someone accidentally deleted all your trees. Right now I have my default trees. Sometimes people will delete it so you only see one tree. So if you want to duplicate the type, so what you could do is that you could go edit type, duplicate this, and say, let's say this is tree number 2. You can edit this, render properties. Okay, you say front, back, whatever, but I'll just leave it as it is. This is where you can say scarlet oak. Let's try something else. Let's say Japanese maple. That's what I want. And here you can do is how high is that? So you can say this is 10 meters. Okay, so it's gonna type comment. You can say this is Japanese maple. What does is that for realistic, that's what it looks like. Okay, so you can change it. I mean, that's something that user don't go in, is that you could duplicate it and change it to whatever trees you want. Like here's fall trees, there's even car as a tree, but I will not use it. Yeah, there's like, wow, there's furniture too. Well, that's stupid, but yeah, it is what it is. There's people as well. Yeah, but shrubs, mostly I think this one is like when you see people, it means that it's a plugin, right? Because I think what happened is that if you have Enscape, this is automatically plugged into this RPC stuff. By default, you're not going to have this if you're just using regular Revit that doesn't have landscape. So what you're going to see is trees, is basically shrubs, planting in general, and that's pretty much it. So you can actually select what you want and just change it. Alrighty, so that's pretty much the planting side of things. Nothing much too heavy emphasis on that. Alright, so here, let's look at this grading region. Okay, select a topo grade. You want to add a topo surface to create a new one. Just click on this. Now what this does is that it lets you, okay, this topo has been graded in this phasing. It will create results in destroying the same phase. Okay, that's a. So what this does is that you can add points or delete points. So here I'm just going to do is, let's say, assume that you want to add a berm or something. So here I'm just going to go 4 meter. Okay, there we go. And then say finish it. And what it does is that it creates this 2 different phase where what happened is that you're not going to see it until I say show complete, right? So what I did previously is that it basically creates your old topo, plus on top of it I'm basically adding a new part, which is like your berm on top. So if you want to do like a lot of like landscaping at the background and stuff like that, you want to pop up all of that building, sometimes you would do that. But I would not do it out of necessity because this tool is not really that useful to me. What I typically like to do is that I let landscape figure out how to do it, and I would use this. I would never use like this modification, like where you add bunch of new points right here. I don't do that. What I like to do is that I like to use either roof or floor and then just pop it up. That way it's much easier to control. You know what's new, what's old. Whereas this one is kind of like it does it and merge it together, and then you don't know what's what.
So you can't create a new topography that just sits on top of it?
You can, but you could create you can create multiple. Like, I mean, I've seen what people does in my previous project. I've seen is that people just duplicate topo on top of each other, and that's creating so much mess because sometimes what happens is that Revit gets confused when you add pads to it. Sometimes it doesn't understand if I add the pads for this or add the pads for that. There's a lot of things like bugs, and it's never ironed out. So what I typically like to tell users that if you have to create another topo that has all these new changes, I will keep it as a separate file. That way you can just modify whatever is in there, and this one you want to keep it more like an existing, or you can do that one is existing. This one is where you're going to modify the new topo. Okay, so you have 2 files, and then you're not kind of conflicting with one another.
You link one into the other.
Yes, that's correct. So if you want to have the existing, then you just link it in, and then that one's only appear in the new. Yeah, that's how the site works. It's very clunky. I would just say it's not very good in sense of making things useful. Now, okay, so let's go into the site designer tools. This is something that, again, it's a very clunky tool, but it has some usefulness. So the first thing I'm going to do is that you kind of have to set base topo surface. So what I'm going to do is that first you do that. It's going to tell you which surface. I'm just going to say pick this one. Come on, pick that one. And then it just does, like sometimes you will say it will pick it itself and enter. Yeah, sometimes it just doesn't do anything, right? You pick it, it's like it doesn't understand what is going on. Okay, so, and then okay. And then it just tells you, okay, sure, yes. Proposed topo, apply. And what it does is that it creates its own little kind of a file to itself, but it's still topo. Now the next thing you can do is that you can build street. Okay, click on this. Always load default family. Oh sure, just default family's fine. Now this is where it gets confusing. Okay, you can say use an existing host file. The problem is that what is host file? I don't even know. Like I tried a couple times, I pick on it, never works. So what I typically like to do is just pick on this host line, radius 0 is fine, and just say insert. So what you do is that you just draw one line and draw here and here, enter, hopefully enter. You can go cancel. Cannot create site component because there's blah 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 blah. Yeah. You see where this has become very clunky. This doesn't tell you anything. And I think this is why a lot of people cannot create site component because there's one more. Oh, bloody. Yeah. It's like a trial and error because I've been fighting over it for so long for like to get it to work. Cannot create site component because they have more line segments. Yeah. It's a failed endeavor. Let's say I want a segment and say insert. Yeah. Oh boy, this. You're just basically fighting the program, right? The program just doesn't tell you what error. But this is kind of like how I do it. Like if you try one, I think what happened with this, my case, is that I have two topo surface. It just doesn't understand what topo to go with. So yeah, if you have like a simple, maybe I should just try like the simple one. Okay, I'll just exit out of this and just open up a sample topo. I'll just go open up focus group, site tool, samples. Let's go with this guy right here. Hopefully that works. Oops. Oops, did I just close it? I think I did. Yeah, I don't know why it does that sometimes. Okay, so here I'm gonna go into that particular folders again. So it's go into the standard focus group, site tool, samples, broad, open. It will just upgrade. Yeah, one thing I forgot to mention, like probably I'll do that the last, is like how do you take, let's say, a civil drawings, and then how do you translate that into Revit for topography? In the past, what tends to happen is that when someone sends you a file, it does have 3D contour. That's probably the easiest. If you have that 3D contour, that's great. You could just go link it in and pick that contour, and it will just basically say, okay, create that contour mesh. But in some scenario where it doesn't do that, so let's, for example, you receive a file from, this one's from Berard as an example. This one, if you go into the model itself, okay, just go into the model itself. When you go to, let's say, the 3D mode for this particular file, what you're getting is that you only get points. You get nothing out of this, right? So there's only points. There's no 3D information. So when you link this into Revit and trying to do topography, it will tell you, nope, can't do it. Okay, so how do you take this information and put it into Revit? There is a tool. Yeah, this one is probably not going to be. Let's take a look. Okay, yeah, let's go into the site designer first, and then I'll discuss like how do you extract this. Okay, the site designer. Again, I'm just going to go in here, set topo, and just say pick. Yeah, let's say I'm going to pick that. Okay, you have to press escape, say okay, yes, topography, sure, apply. Now, if you have all of this surface, like all this sub-region already created, what it does is that it will just make it into just one piece of surfaces. And that's the unfortunate thing. Once you have that, sketch line is, yeah, sure, just ignore whatever they say. Okay, now what you can do is that you can build roads. Yes, yeah, sure. It just, yeah, sometimes I don't even know what it's trying to explain to me, because none of the site tools are very helpful. They're very cryptic and they're not really useful, unfortunately. So here I'm just going to go to topography. I'm going to turn off or delete this object. Okay. If you've been to the Burrow station, yeah, this is kind of like the sample files that I'm using. I should get rid of this. Okay, I'm gonna get rid of that. Oh yeah, the pinning tool. So you have to unpin it first and get rid of it. There we go. Okay, so now what you can do is that let's create a road, street. Okay, yeah, just use the default. Now pick to draw. So I'm just going to draw It's going to take time. Yeah, just be patient with it. You just draw 2 lines. And what it does is that it automatically would generate roads. Okay? You notice that right now it's building roads. Good. There we go, updating the model in the process. So what it does is that you could just build road, and then if you want to do intersection, so let's assume that you want to do like an intersection between the two, all you have to do is just draw it, and it will automatically create intersection. Okay, very clunky. Unfortunately, it's good for a show. Yes. Okay. Finished. Yeah, it's gonna do all that topo surface and all that stuff. And one thing I can never modify is that once you pick a road, it doesn't have the, like here you kind of have to know what elevation you're at, okay? And then what happens is that if you know your elevation, it would basically create this road. Here, I'll just turn it to a hidden line. It'll create a road, but it would create this, berm kind of like, going up and stuff like that. Sometimes I don't find this very useful because for road, all you will need is that make me a road that follows the surface. It doesn't do that. That's the problem. So I just like, this is pointless. It's good for showing. I could show you like, yeah, you can do it. It works, but reality is that it's not very useful because it's like, oh, you tell it to go on this elevations, and that's pretty much it. You don't do much. It does.
It makes a flat road every time.
Yes, it does.
Oh, you cannot slope it.
Yeah,
oh,
that's
okay.
that's the thing. This is why I don't recommend it. They do have parking lot. Again, it's the same thing. It just flatten the whole site. Let's assume that your site is sloping. It's just gonna make you a parking lot with a flat surface. So it's like, no, this is not useful, right? It's trying to be civil, guys, but it just fails at that execution in terms of how easy can you use it. You have soft terrain as well. Again, you guys can just monkey around with this, but I would just say, yeah, try it if you wanted to use it, but I would just not recommend doing it. But one thing it does is that it creates what's known as the road parameter. Because in here, you notice that there is one called road. You can never create it using real Revit family. So this is where that category comes in play. So yeah, like people always ask, why do we need road? Yeah, it's because of the site tool. Unfortunately, it's that it's not very useful. You see that there's nothing here I could adjust anything. So it's pretty much dead on arrival kind of a thing. So if you can't modify this, it's not very useful, then what's the point? Right? But just play around. I mean, if maybe there's something that's useful for you guys, like retaining wall, but I just say avoid it if you can. Use it if you just need to just show to your friend that, yeah, it does work. But it's very clunky. It's just, I wish it...
Maybe it'll be further developed in later versions of the program.
No, I talked to Autodesk. They just say, nope. They just purchased it from Eagle Point, right? It's a third-party developer that created this. Eagle Point is a very popular plugin for AutoCAD that does a lot of this civil things. But for Revit, it's a very primitive, I would say. It's not a lot of functionality in there. But it has some good ideas, but it's just poorly executed. All right. Let's getting back to this particular scenario. Okay, so let's assume that you have this topographics where you don't have any points. Like you have points, but you don't have anything. So how do you take that and put it inside Revit? So the first thing you want to do is that you may have to load in a plugin. So let's see, app load. Oh, actually, menu load. So I'm just going to unload this and reload that because I just want to show you where the plugin. You can download the plugin if you want. I use it. Let's see. I use this guy right here. It's called the Point Extractor, LIMAC Point Extractor. This is for like any YouTubers wants to know where it is. So that's the point manager, LIMAC. I implemented into this plugin because it's a very useful tool. So what I'm going to do is that I'm just going to show you where I kind of load this in. So if you want, you can go into, if you're the pull down guy, how you access the pull down is through this guy right here. Hide menu bar, but if you want to load it, that's where it is. So here what I have is that you have the tools, miscellaneous utility, I call it the point extraction manager. So what this does is that it wants to tell you what do you want to input. I want points, and what I want to output, it's called file. Okay, I'll go browse and make sure you call it CSV file. Okay, let's see, right now it's under that particular file, which I don't want, so I'll just put it in my desktop. So let's say client CSV file, and when you hit OK, it'll just basically extract all that point. Okay, now a couple things you kind of have to check is that what is your point. Make sure it's all decimal. Okay, don't change it to architectural nothing, because that point's only 1 point. Okay, the number, that's the most important thing, because if you put it inside Revit, it'll tell you what number they're supposed to be. If it's a feet, square meters, or something else, then you can tell it it's a feet, it's a meters, or whatever. If you don't do this, what does is that Revit just will not function. If you give it, like, let's say architectural, it will produce feet in the number, and when Revit translate that, it just doesn't understand. Okay, just keep in mind, always decimal. Know what their units. I always like a precision to be whatever you want, but it doesn't matter what it is. Okay, once you have that, what it does is that it will create a CSV file, which is right here. Yeah, it's on my desktop somewhere. Yeah, it's one of those files. Now, here, what I'm going to do is that if you want to, let's say, start a new project, okay, I say architectural. This is where it gets fun. So here, what I'm going to do is that you go to massing, go to topo surface. This is where you're going to put in, let's say, select from instance or select from file. So I typically say select from file. Okay, it tells you where you want to put it. I typically go into, actually, it's a desktop, but anyways, I'll choose this one because I already exported out. Okay, CSV file, and once you hit open, it will tell you what units you want it to be. But this one I know that it's in meters, so when you hit OK, there we go. So that's how I do it, the process from like the AutoCAD side into the Revit side. Okay, because a lot of time, yeah, you're gonna get this garbage points, so you kind of have to go in there and just get rid of it. Okay, because they're not very useful. Some of them are like measuring the pole, the height of the building, right? So yeah, that's the mistranslation. So what you have to do is just get rid of all the point that's not useful to you. And then this one, however, translates the points for the underground kind of a thing. So it's your job to just go in there and just clean up the mess. And next thing you want to do is that you want to create a pad, right? So you want to clear out all this crap. Then I just use the pad, clean it out. Okay, so once I finish this, I'll just go here, go building pad, just built. Let's say this is my site. There we go, clear it out. Okay, so you don't have that garbage in there. Okay, so and then this is kind of like your process. You just basically build it from there. Unfortunately, Revit doesn't have tunnel tools at the moment. I know some people asking, can you build tunnels? You can build it using Dynamo, but not in this process, right? If you want to do it manually, my best bet is to what I did here is that if you want to build a tunnel, I'll show you what I did in this particular. I'm just gonna undo. Oh, or actually, don't save this. No. What I did here is that I kind of have to blend in between the two. So what I did is that I did a pad, and then on top of it, I kind of have to fill it in with a sidewalk, which is like floor. So that way you get that simulation of you have an underground, right, like train station, and on top it's just basically floor slabs. So. Okay, That's pretty much it. If you guys have any question, I mean, this site is not the best, I would say, but at least it's manageable. You could use it for to do your very simple site. Okay, the most complicated site you can build as big as you want. It just depending on how much you want to do a lot of the stuff.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Let's say we have a CAD file with the heights and the topography. We bring it in and create that surface.
Yes.
And now we want to have roads or sidewalks with like what I was doing till now. I was use like paint so that I could have the roads and everything moved with the surface topography. What would you suggest doing if we don't want to use this? If the road thing is not that.
Yeah. So what I typically do is just use Subregion. I mean, the thing is that it really depends on how much detail you want to go in, right? A lot of time, if you're doing like the design development phase, and you don't need to show any of the road details, I just say use Subregion is perfectly fine, because all you're doing is just representing where your outline's supposed to be. But once you get into more detail, let's say for example you're doing working drawings, this is where you're going to go in and basically mask all this Revit thing and just blend it with the road or with that topo surface. Now in this particular case, you notice that there is an underground here, right? So what I have to do here is that I have to cut out using a pad that's like a tunnel, right? Put it down right there, and then what I have to do here is that I have to match it with, I'll just hide that. So here you notice that there is a depth here because it's a tunnel. So on top of it I just have to clean up with just the floor slabs. In the future, hopefully there is a tool for that, because I don't think Autodesk ever dealt with a lot of the underground kind of architecture. It's mostly surface architecture, but I think in the future we will see a lot more, because we're one of the people that's doing a lot of underground SkyTrain, and there is no tool, so we just have to work around it and just use whatever available tools. All right, any questions so far with this? Pretty easy, pretty straightforward.
So to create the roads, as you say, over top of the tunnel,
Yes.
You would use a slab.
I will use
slope
slabs.
slab as opposed to the railing tool.
Yeah, railing tool, this will fail, because what happens is that the pads, it does not respect, like if the railing only respect it if there is a surface on top. If there is no surface on top, what happened is that it's just going to fall flat, right? Because it just follows whatever the pad's doing.
To host on something.
Yes, something that is a surface. So,
Okay.
but you could still host it like a railing on a funky surface like this. This is what I like about railing, is that if you do run into this, where you have to host an object on like this particular slopey kind of I should get rid of that stuff. You can actually draw in. Yeah, I should go to 3D. You can draw in a railing. Yeah, I should get rid of that. Now, guys, if why CAD import is not a good thing, this is the reason. This is a CAD import. Because CAD import, like what I mean by that is that if you build like a lot of models, whether it's SketchUp or Revit, or not SketchUp, AutoCAD, or other 3D platform, once you put it into the Revit side of things, it becomes really, really bogged down. Heavy? Yes, even though it's very light. I mean, this model itself, I do a lot of extrusion using 3D solids, and it's not that bad, but the problem is that Revit has to do that extra processing in the background. So if you can, build it natively inside Revit so that it's much more manageable, but for this one it's kind of like sometimes you can get hanged or something else happens.
So would you build it in a separate Revit model and link it in?
Yes, if you want to do that, yes. And yeah, well, one thing I want to demonstrate right now, it's crashed, so there's nothing much I can do with this file. So if you want to do like, I'm just going to jump into the other Revit. So if you have topography and you're using a lot of floor plan, railing will respect floor plans, like the floor. So if you have slopey surface and stuff like that, you could just draw like a point and say host it on the floor slab, even though the surface is like very, very like like organic and stuff like that, it would still respect that profile.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks so much.
No problem. All right. Hopefully you learned something today.
Yeah.
Yes.